We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to AVRant. I'm Tom Andry, and I'm here with
Rob H.
Muzammil. Muzammil has two external USB sound cards for his computer. One is the 5.1 multi-channel gaming sound card, the Creative Omni, and the other is the 2-channel audiophile Sound Blaster X5. In either case, he connects the USB output from his Windows 10 computer to the USB input of whatever sound card he's using. Then he connects the RCA line out of that sound card to his Tannoy 502 self-powered studio monitors. He did a direct A/B comparison and found that the Sound Blaster X5 did clearly have greater fidelity than the Omni. He did notice that the Omni lists a signal-to-noise ratio of 100 dB, while the X5 lists 114 dB. We've said repeatedly that DACs don't make a difference, but amplification can. However, in this case, amplification stays the same, built into his 10 noise monitors, and the only thing he's changing is his external sound card, which is a DAC, right? What he's hearing is an obvious difference. It's not subtle or imagined, which we would never suggest that you imagined it, except we would infer it. He isn't making the leap that DACs are actually responsible, though, because the two sound cards list these clearly different signal-to-noise ratio specs in the line outs. So is the DAC in the X5 that is better than the DAC in the Omni, or is it the line out that is better? And how would anybody be able to tell?
Right. So I wanted to address right away. This is a very fair question because
it is.
When Tom and I say DAC, we're talking about a digital to analog converter because that's
right.
what DAC stands for.
Exactly.
And that is one little chip that takes digital audio and converts it into an analog waveform. But then it has to go through some gain stages to get it to a line out or a pre-out level. It can go through some filtering occasionally. It could go through some digital signal processing prior to being converted. There's many other things that could happen, and all of those things can be bundled into little devices that are sometimes called DACs for the sake of simplicity, when truthfully, they are more than just a digital to analog converter. They also do some other functions. And so that's extremely fair because you'll look at a product and it says, this is an external DAC, but it's actually DSP plus decoder plus DAC plus preamplifier plus headphone amplifier or something like that, right? But that's too long a thing to put on there. So I wanted to
what
point
we're
that
talking about when we say a DAC is a mature technology is the conversion from a digital signal to the analog signal.
Right.
That simple conversion, nothing on the other sides, either other sides of it, is a mature thing, and everybody who says we can do it this much better, if they are making improvements, it's not in that. It's not in the digital to analog conversion. It is maybe in how they amplify it slightly for the gain stages, if they're doing some DSPing to it or doing this or that, you know, reducing the signal to noise ratio. Some of these other things possibly could make a big difference. But in your case,
completely fair. I mean, there can be actual differences in the DACs themselves, but these days that's primarily the highest sampling rate and bit depth that they're able to work with. I mean, there are some DACs that can take a 24-bit 192 or a 36-bit 384 or whatever and convert that to analog, whereas another DAC, and I mean I'm talking strictly about the DAC, would not be able to even handle that sampling rate and bit depth. So there are legitimate differences in the DACs, but once you get past the chip that turns the digital audio into analog audio, it's all the other stuff involved that makes the difference.
And a sound card is much more than just a simple DAC.
Right. I mean, this one being 5.1, clearly it's a decoder as well.
Yeah, that's right. So we're seeing here. You're seeing a lot of other things going into this. Clearly, there's the signal noise issue, which is in there, but there's the DSP that's happening. If we have our 5.1, if there is a DSP that can happen there, or it can handle that 5.1 signal where the other one can't. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that can go on here, and you hearing a real difference. Well, I mean, obviously, the Omni is I'm guessing it's probably a lower priced option as
It is.
well. But
Yep.
I haven't looked at the specs, but it's probably a lower priced option. The X-Fi is going to be something that they're going to be paying more close attention to this to not just the signal noise, but the signal itself, making sure that no interference, no distortion is coming into it, because anybody who's going to buy something that's being at least labeled as audiophile, if you're not buying it from Apple, then they are actually caring about how things sound.
Yeah, and to simplify it even further,
yeah.
like we've talked about how an external sound card or an external DAC, a USB DAC for your computer, can make a lot of sense because a lot of headphone jacks on computers are quite noisy. Well, think about this. There's a DAC in your computer. Right? There's a DAC in your computer turning the digital sound in your computer into analog, and then it's sending it out a preamplifier stage and then into a headphone amplifier, and what comes out of the headphone jack is kind of noisy. But again, we don't think it's the DAC chip that's responsible. We think it's the preamplifier stage and the headphone amplifier stage.
Right.
So same thing here, right? We can apply that to this as well. The Omni probably has a noisier preamplifier, this isn't a headphone, so it's a noisier preamplifier stage than the X-Fi does. That's entirely possible, and it's entirely reasonable to say, yeah, there are some devices that are noisier than others, and that would lead to greater fidelity in the one that has less noise or less distortion. Where we normally say an external DAC doesn't make a lot of sense, and this is actually coming into the next question, but it's when somebody's saying, I have an AV receiver and I have a digital source, should I put an external DAC in between those two things? And that's where we're always like, no, just send the digital source directly into your AV receiver and let it do the decoding and the digital analog conversion.
Right.
So
then this question is, and how would anybody be able to tell? Well, if you can't do an A/B like you're doing, it is awfully hard to tell, by looking at the specs. You've seen the difference in the specs with the signal to noise ratio, but a lot of times you look at the specs themselves and it's a little hard to tell.
Yeah.
That's what reviews are for. That's where you do your research and you find out, hey, this person's saying these things, this person's saying these things. I trust what this person's saying more than this other person because of these reasons. And if you can do your A/Bs, you do your A/Bs. You're fortunate enough to have done that and to have seen a real difference. You should write a review. I mean, we're gonna put it on our podcast, right, on our podcast notes, that you preferred this one versus the other one, and people will see that, maybe listen to the podcast and hear your reasons why. But yeah, that's what it really comes down to. So he goes on to say, when we say, meaning us, say things external DACs are silly and we make it pretty clear that we don't recommend them or think they're worthwhile, how are we able to separate the DAC from the rest of the device, such as amplifiers or line out and preamplifier section? Maybe the actual DAC doesn't make a difference, but the line out section of the device does. And these external DACs are sold as a unit. So even if they're not strictly the DAC making a difference, the unit as a whole can make a difference. So can't they still be worthwhile? Well,
Yes.
they can, and and we often say they are, especially when we're talking about computers. But like Rob said before, what really comes into where I have the real issue is when we're putting the DAC before an item, before a unit that isn't having an issue. Like they're like, I want to improve my sound. There is nothing wrong with the sound I currently have, but I want to make it better somehow. Like, okay, so what's wrong? No, okay, is it noisy? Nope, it's not noisy. Okay, are you having problems hearing it? Nope, I can hear it. Is it, clipping or doing anything weird? Nope, it's not doing any of that. So what are you doing? It's the same issue we have, and on the exact opposite side of the chain, as adding an amplifier to a receiver that doesn't need an amplifier. Right. People do this all the time, saying, I want to make my system sound better. I'm going to add the amplifier to it. What speakers are you running? Klipsch. How big's your room? 19 by 12. You do not need an amplifier. Well, right. No, it's going to make it sound better. No, it's going to make it sound exactly the same, unless there's something really wrong with your amplifier, because there's no need for it. The Klipsch are very efficient speakers, and you're sitting extremely close to them. There's no way that your receiver is clipping or adding any noise unless you're telling us that it is. And on the other side of that, other side of the receiver or the signal chain, adding a DAC to a product that isn't making a deleterious effect, there's no point.
Yeah, I think primarily where we've said external DACs are silly is because we tend to focus mostly on home theater and surround sound. And where we're commonly seeing it is somebody saying, I want to attach my computer to my AV receiver. so that I can have surround sound with sources that are coming directly off my
Right.
computer. And I've been told on such and such a forum that I need an external DAC to do that, or that's the best way to do that to get the best quality. That's where we tend to say an external DAC is silly in that case. If you have a digital output from your computer, send that digital sound directly to the AV receiver. You don't need a device in between those two things because the AV receiver can already perform that functionality perfectly well. So that tends to be the case where we're saying external DACs are silly. When it comes to, like I was saying at the beginning, these devices that are a bundle of things, but they just call it a DAC for simplicity, I don't want people to think that there is no such thing as one possibly sounding better than another. You're absolutely right. And it probably came across that way because we have said, like, DACs are all the same and stuff like that. And so we're trying to clarify that. I have certainly heard some USB external sound card, external DAC devices that are like, they're pretty crappy. They're really not better than the existing headphone jack, in which case, yes, one that has a nice low noise floor and better amplification, all that clearly sounds better. So you're absolutely right. There can be a difference. We're trying to point out when it's not needed in the signal chain.
And in home theater, it's often the case, and I'm trying to come up with an example where it's not the case, but it's often the case that you do not need a DAC.
It's pretty rare.
I really can't come up off the top of my head with
if you had like a stereo analog preamplifier, right?
Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah.
You could do it. That might be one. I mean, at that point it'd just be easier to upgrade your receiver than anything else. It'd be cheaper too, most of the time.
Could be.
But if you really loved your receiver. He lastly asks, are the pre-outs on AV receivers effectively line out? Answer is yes on that. But anyways, go on. Do they carry the same voltage as an external sound card's line outs? And again, once you've got a DAC that feeds the pre-outs, could the pre-out itself create a difference in the sound even if the DACs don't? Oh, that's kind of what we're saying, is that they can.
Yep.
The lineouts can.
Yeah, there could be noisy ones.
There can.
Or
and they're
poorly filtered ones.
Not only that, if you read like Gene's reviews at Audioholics, he'll talk about crosstalk. And most of the time, it's not an issue. Like 99% of the time, he's like, he measures nothing. But every once in a while, he'll measure something. He'll measure some crosstalk between the pre-outs, or some sort of issue that's going on there. And usually the receiver manufacturers freak out and go back and try to fix it right away if they can. At least, as best they can. So it is possible. It's just
to answer directly, typically something that is called a line out is a fixed level.
Right.
There's a certain standard amount of voltage gain that's applied to the signal, and that's what comes out of a line out, whereas a pre-out is typically variable, and certainly on an AV receiver it is variable. You can adjust the trim levels in the AV receiver, and that will boost or decrease the average voltage level that's coming out of that pre-out section. I mean, there are things that are called variable line outs, and that would essentially be the same as a pre-out, where you can vary the average voltage. But the function they perform at the end of it all is the same. And yeah, if you're talking about an RCA line out versus an RCA pre-out, then yeah, the voltages are very much within the same range because both of them are designed to plug directly into an amplifier that has RCA inputs. And of course, you could use either or. You could use a line out or a pre-out, and you will get very similar results. But the pre-out will be variable.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.